This was a story about a girl who was tired of basing her identity around the things she was forced to consume, the things she was supposed to be according to the Grand Architect. In essence, Denia didn't truly break free from the literal chains that bound her until the very end. With the version 3.3 update now having reached its cathartic end, I think now is the time to do a full psychoanalytic breakdown on Denia's character. This wasn't on the same level as Frolova's story last July, but there are places where you will find similarities. Well, I did find myself a little disappointed by the pacing of the 3.3 Segue quest, Denia's story. It wasn't bad, but there's something to be said about the rushed writing the last couple patches now. Sigrika's quest was about getting to know her not just as a resonator, but as a person and a friend to Denia, directly tying into the later 3.3 story quest. Her knowledge of the Rowan runes, which led to Morny deciphering Aemy's cassette, then, and now the latter half of Denia's quest. Before I can talk about Denia though, I need to mention Sigrika because these two characters are two parts of the same whole. Sigrika was not the naive girl she was portrayed as throughout much of the Star Torch chapter thus far. Instead, she's been quietly observing the situation from the outside, and that includes keeping up Denia's moves. Rover's, let's call them excuses, to Sigrika during the heated exchange she had with Denia were unhelpful, and only sought to intensify the situation further. Truthfully, it was hard to watch because Sigrika had been burdened with all these expectations. She was a star student, someone to model academically. She was the signifier of academic perfection, which led to a full mental breakdown in 3.2. The realization of those expectations being more than she could mentally carry. Sigrika became an idea, something everyone else wanted to be. In some ways, you could call this the ideal ego. Things that create a perfect fake persona that achieves the unconscious mind's unrealized desires. Hey, you wanna know what my unconscious mind's desire is? It's for you to subscribe and follow me on Twitter. That was a pretty good segue, right? Okay, if I lost you, let me explain what I'm talking about. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, the unconscious mind, the part of your mind you can't access, isn't something that's shaped throughout one's biological development and life, their growth and formation into an adult. This is where Lacan differs from Freud. Lacan's model is more structural, saying that the unconscious is shaped by the language around us. It's a linguistic approach, one that relies on how language is used around us, rather than being something that is derived from the psychosexual aspect of things. Lacan focuses more on the environmental influences. Freud's approach is a 5-stage approach: oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital stages. Each stage is exactly how it sounds, but to clarify the middle two, the phallic stage includes the exploration of the self, years 3 through 6. Yes, that means what you think it does. The latent stage is the lack of sexual motivation in ages 6 through puberty. Between these 5 stages, the ego and superego develop, the ego in the first stage and the superego in the third. Freud's belief was that sexual energy is present throughout the body and is expressed through different parts in different ways. You could call this the id. The id is driven by the pleasure principle, a desire to satisfy things like hunger and thirst, just to name a couple. The ego must mediate between this, the moral demands of the superego, and the real-world constraints, things that occur in the individual's life that have a mental effect. It's the rational thinker, but it also uses defense mechanisms such as repression and denial to manage things like anxiety. The superego is the moral conscience. It is shaped by things learned through life and one's parents, normally developing between ages 3 and 5. Likewise, it has 2 stages, one of which I already talked about, and we'll see again in a coming video over here. The conscience and the ego ideal. Again, that ideal self the mind unconsciously creates. This is how Freudian psychoanalysis roughly goes. But are you starting to see the problem when we apply this to Denia? We'll talk about that. On the other side of the argument, one that is still heavily debated today is Lacan psychoanalysis. Remember, this focus is based on linguistics, language, and not the psychosexual development of the self. Lacan says there are 3 registers to psychoanalysis: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. Applying these registers to Denia and Sigrika had an opportunity to become her own self despite the influence from outside media and representations, things that played a role in shaping her identity. She was able to look into a mirror as a child and say, "This is me." This is known as the mirror stage and usually occurs early in a child's life. Can we apply this stage and register to Denia? Yes, actually, because Denia was essentially created by the Grand Architect, her, quote, childhood is shaped a little differently. The imaginary here is what shapes Denia. She is influenced by external media and perceptions that she believes she has to match to be a human, thus creating this imaginary sense of self that isn't disposed of until the very end of the quest, but it's shaped by images she isn't seeing in person. Normally, this stage is pre-symbolic and pre-language, aka before symbols and language are understood. When I say symbols, however, symbols are things that you see on signs, billboards, ads, television commercials. They aren't the real thing, they're just symbols, replicas of the real thing. Simulacra. These images and symbols are thus made to influence Denia, so she becomes this perfect model that doesn't fight back and accepts every command made by the Grand Architect. As we saw during the last 30 or so minutes of the quest, that control over Denia begins to fray. This is apparent when the Grand Architect says they want her, Denia, home for dinner each night after it's discovered she's been eating dessert at the Academy. Now, those copies start to lose their grip on her. This is Denia's psychosexual development beginning to take over. Her identity had been hand-picked by the Grand Architect so she would act as a perfect vessel for LF1. That meant no sense of self or conscious awareness of self. See how the Freudian model of psychoanalysis becomes a problem in its application? It can't account for Denia's development because she wasn't conceived from a mother and father. She doesn't have anything to base an ego off of. Not ego as in haughty attitude, which becomes a problem. She has no defense mechanism to protect her against trauma, the same trauma that follows her back into Dimmer Deep and her home, though by this time, that ego has been able to form, albeit not completely. It's her superego that decides to end her life. Her moral standards ensure no one else has to suffer what she did, and that LF1's link back to Lahai-Roi is no longer accessible. This model of psychoanalysis is difficult to use with Denia because she hasn't had 18 or 20 plus years to develop herself like everyone else, and her actual self isn't something created by original copies of the aforementioned symbols that one uses in the developmental stages of life. See how these two models differ in their analysis of Sigrika and Denia? These copies are essentially that other that Lacan frames, and there are two types, the little other and the big other. The little other is essentially a reflection of her counterpart to the ego. The little other sits in the imaginary and is the other we envision ourselves to be. It's not the specific ego, rather it's the ideal ego. Denia's ideal self is one where she gets to eat that cake she requested, where she gets to enjoy her days in Star Torch with her friends, with Sigrika and Nastasha. Navora was really only ever a fraud, but Sigrika doesn't know this. Hence why a reality where Denia gets to eat cake and celebrate her birthday is also the ideal version Sigrika sees for herself. It's a version where the world is perfect and she gets to be with Denia and Navora. This other, the little one, thus proves that Denia was forming an ego, part of her unconscious mind that was shaped by the world around her. However, this makes for an argument where you could say that these linguistic features are what shaped that formation. Either way you see it, the imaginary is perhaps the most powerful influencer on Denia's development. Clearly, the imaginary is important, but it's not the only stage of Lacan psychoanalysis. There still exists the symbolic and the real. For Denia, the symbolic represents the actual structures of language that shape her identity, that make her who she is. This is the stage that introduces the child, typically to language and prohibition, the stage where an understanding of law begins to emerge. Whereas the imaginary fills in gaps left by the real, I'll get to that, the symbolic is where the child is exposed to the rules of the world and social structure. I mentioned symbols earlier, and these can be taken as signs as well, but it's also where the big other resides, the observer that obeys the rules of the world and for whom we perform. Because each individual person is unique, there's a sense of performance we put on when out in public. This performance is seen in Denia when she's at Star Torch. She is someone else entirely than when she's home. Therefore, this stage defines how she communicates with the world and the ways in which she performs for its rules. Remember, Denia is introduced to the world through language, but she already has a sense of language. The more complex understanding of this linguistic feature has to come through her immersion in the world. The Grand Architect, then, is that maternal part of the world, but Denia's identity and unconscious remains incomplete, because there isn't a paternal role that regulates her interaction with a parent of the opposite sex, and thus no competition for attention from the other parental figure. The Oedipus complex, basically. Everything she has learned, she has consumed through various forms of media, tutorials, fairy tales. The lack of a paternal figure, the figure that is most responsible for the formation of the conscience, thus makes her a somewhat incomplete vessel that does know how to interact with the world. Not completely. So, whereas the imaginary was the realm of ego formation, misrecognition, and narcissism, think alienation. The symbolic is the realm of the name of the father. The parental and paternal things they mentioned and lack thereof, and the way the unconscious is then structured as a language. Basically, that last part means the unconscious forms in layers, id, ego, superego, and is influenced through different linguistic structures. But think about how languages have all these different rules and moving parts, or the way you form a sentence. How do you structure your clauses? Where do you place the subject, object, and the verb? There's more to it than that, but that should give you a general idea. As for the real, to put it in simple terms, it's the thing that cannot be grasped. It's always there, and you can see it, but you can't actually grasp or obtain it. Think about a snow globe. There's a whole tiny world beyond the glass, but you can't actually reach that little world because the glass hinders you, it separates you. For Denia, that world is a life where she doesn't have to feel like she's riding a train to a pre-planned destination rather than riding it to anywhere or a place of her choosing. This is the real that prevents her from doing or going as she pleases. The Grand Architect decides what she does and where she goes. There's no autonomy in Denia's decisions because she isn't given that freedom, that ability to interact with a world where she is in control. It's not until the Grand Architect leaves her behind at Star Torch that she finally gets to exercise that autonomy, but only after she leaves the Academy the night of her birthday after Rover leaves to get the cake. Really, this world and her idealized self can't actually be had because she is essentially forced into taking her own life at the very end of the quest. Her ego has absorbed all these negative feelings of the Academy and the world because it's all she's ever known. Her entire identity is constructed by signs and symbols, things that are only copies of their original, and this is a world she has been forced to live in and interact with. When the Academy placed her under containment, even after the Grand Architect had left, she was still refused that autonomy. In fact, it was both something that was out of her hands and intentional. The monitoring was agreed upon by Rover and the Academy. The suppression device was Denia's idea. She wanted to give herself a chance for the Academy to trust her, but she knew that was an unrealistic desire. Moreover, this stage is something that develops before language and images. It's something that is inherent in every person, but for Denia, given that this is usually a neonatal stage, it was something that wormed its way between the imaginary and the real. To make matters worse for her, this stage is also marked by a sense of incompleteness and harbors anxiety as well as desire. Not only is she incomplete psychologically, she's paraded around like a lab mouse, some kind of psychosocial experiment that she is aware of, especially once the Grand Architect begins to rein her back in. And this lack of completeness affects her social abilities, especially with Sigrika. Notice how she tries to avoid Sigrika early in the quest. She doesn't want to face Sigrika because she already knows what she's planning to do, and confronting Sigrika, having to make promises, hurts. It's the mental equivalent of a stinging cut that just doesn't leave you alone. Unfortunately, it's a reality she has to face, because she knows it's a reality she can't have. Her promise to be around to celebrate her birthday next year is a lie. It's a world Denia knows she'll never be able to have, thus exemplifying the real, the world she can't have. All three registers, the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real, are connected by something known as the Borromean knot. No one register can dominate the other, and the key to a healthy psyche and unconscious is balance. That balance should hopefully be reflected on mostly equal times between each register here, but when those registers become unbalanced, it can lead to neurosis, the degeneration of the mind, essentially. When Denia is forced to confront herself, asking questions, refusing to accept the reality that she knows refuses to accept her presence within it, is that unraveling of the Borromean knot, and where her psyche begins to fray, ultimately leading to her death in the home where her suffering started. The beginning was always fated to be the end, but the end was not fated to have a new beginning. Denia could never attain the world she wanted or become the ideal self her ego desired. It was, sadly, a fitting end for something that never really had a chance to begin in the first place. Denia became the signifier for despair. She was the embodiment of anxiety, depression, and trauma. When she speaks of Rover in the infirmary, she isn't downtrodden because she knew, subconsciously, what her end was always meant to be. Because she could no longer resonate with the Thronian once it had been banished, her life force began to fade, and this interconnectedness with the Thronian was the reality she was forced into. One where she never got the chance to be the friend she'd wanted to be for Sigrika or Nastasia. This is why she breaks down in front of Nastasia and why she argues with Sigrika. How do you tell your friends, the only light in your life, that you're dying in a manufactured construct meant to follow orders? Just take a moment to think about that question, because what would you do? So, there you have it. That's a mostly Lacanian psychoanalysis on Denia's character, but I hope the sprinkle of Sigmund Freud's psychosexual model also helps some of that make sense. In truth, this psychoanalysis could go much further, and for much longer, but for the sake of time and understanding, I'm going to leave it at this. Still, I hope this sheds some light on Denia's character. She isn't some depressed girl that wanted a friend. She was an incomplete vessel that had been thrust into the world at a very inopportune and volatile time. Adolescence, as I'm sure we can all attest to, isn't the easiest time to throw a girl, anyone for that matter, into a world that is full of copies and asking her to form an identity based on rigorous standards that are too lofty to achieve. It's nothing short of cruel, mentally and psychologically. Denia wanted to die because she didn't want to be part of a world where good things went to die, where she was the cause of misfortune. Of course, she alienated herself from everyone. Why she always just wanted some space. This was the symbolic register of her unconscious, the one that unconsciously wanted to be alone. This is why she always felt so alone, and why everything she did was always from a distance. She loathes herself so much that her own resonance doesn't heal her, but it does others. She says she loathes people like Rover, but genuinely, I think this was her way of saying, don't leave, I still need you. Kuro games and story writers are incredible. Whether they actually did a full theoretical breakdown as they made Denia is up for debate, but the writing shows extraordinary talent and some serious literary expertise. Denia's story didn't hit like Frollova's in terms of sheer sadness. Rather, Denia's story was more akin to disappointment. Disappointment with the world, one that rejects individuality and happiness. The world chose to reject Denia, her hollow shell filled with loathing, self-delusion, and regret. That is what makes Denia's story so cathartic and psychologically rich. This wasn't forgetting someone, this was living a lie. This was a story about a girl who was tired of basing her identity around the things she was forced to consume, the things she was supposed to be, according to the Grand Architect. In essence, Denia didn't truly break free from the literal chains that bound her until the very end.